I'm done with podcasting. Let's talk about it. What's up, pod influencers? My name is Ozil, and I want to welcome you to the Podcast Influence YouTube channel, where I help you amplify your influence with podcasting. On this channel, I'm going to share with you tips, insights, and strategies on how you can pro up your podcast with style and influence. And today, we're going to talk about a thought that every podcaster has from time to time. Maybe some more than others, but this thought of quitting your podcast. When should you decide to pivot or maybe just quit your podcast entirely and say, look, this is not for me? So in this video, I'm going to break down three that will let you know when it's time to make a pivot from the podcast. All right, sign number one that it's time for you to make a pivot from your podcast. You're struggling with content ideas. You are lacking the passion. You're lacking the motivation, the inspiration. Your heart's not in it. And, that's a great indicator for you to make a pivot, or at least consider making a pivot, because you no longer are in it for the content. And without great quality content, you can't attract an audience and you can't entice an audience. So if you're not in it, it may be time for you to consider making a pivot. That's my advice, which is the reason why I always encourage a lot of new stage podcasters to write a list of 52 topic ideas, topics that they're going to be putting out in a year worth of podcast content. That way it gives you an idea that, look, these are, 30, 52 episodes that I can give a crack at it, that I'm really excited about these topics and I can move forward with this. That's a green light for me. So if you're struggling, you don't have the motivation, you've been giving it some time, and your heart is not in it, it may be a great time for you to make that pivot. All right, sign number two, you're struggling with sticking with a schedule, right? You release an episode every Tuesday, and now you're missing a week or two. You're going back on a Wednesday, and it just becomes really erratic and random and all over the place. And it could be two things. Maybe one, that you need to be able to reassess your lifestyle and adjust your schedule according to the podcast release. That could be one solution. Or this could be an indicator that it's time to make a pivot from the podcast. I believe that when you make a commitment to your podcast, you're making a commitment to show up. And I do believe in being consistent with your podcast. And if you find yourself really having a hard time sticking with the schedule, this is an indicator that it's time for you to pivot, maybe reassess your lifestyle, and maybe go back to the drawing board to figure out what's a more suitable publishing schedule for you. So if you're struggling with that, might be time to make a move and pivot. All right, and sign number three, you've been podcasting for over a year and your podcast isn't growing at all. Now, I want to say this. If you're passionate about the podcast, the content, stick with it. Stick with it. Sometimes the numbers don't grow until, later on down the line. What I've found with my clients and the work that I do is normally two things. It's either your branding is off or your marketing is off. Once we tweak it, we can grow the podcast. But if you're finding yourself just not growing the podcast, and it's just, you've been at it, a year and a half, 2 years, and you're not investing in a podcast coach or somebody to really help you level up on certain areas, then and you're not enjoying it, it may be time for you to make a pivot. Again, I say that with a lot of love, because a lot of people will be like, well, I'm a hobbyist, this is my podcast and I enjoy it. Hey, listen, if that's your thing, continue doing you. As long as you're enjoying it, you're passionate about it, forget, we can go ahead and avoid the metrics. Let's get rid of that because you're enjoying it. I'm all for that, right? It could be a passion project. But there are a lot of people, podcasters, you may be interested in growing your podcast. You want to see it grow. You want people listening to your content. So if you're not growing It may be time that there might not be a market for it. Or maybe, again, it might be your branding or your marketing. But it may be time also to make a pivot and switch it up and do maybe a different type of podcast. So again, that's another indicator that it may be time for you to make that switch. In closing, I want to say this. It's okay to make a pivot. Quitting does not mean that you have failed at podcasting. It happens a lot in the TV, mainstream media world. There are pilots that don't make it out the gate. There's TV shows that make 2 to 3 seasons and then, they're done. And it's time to make a pivot. Let's face it. I'm a fan of The Walking Dead, right? I felt like it could have been done a few seasons ago, but it's still going, it's still going, it hasn't made a pivot. But there are a lot of TV shows, some of my favorite shows where people just stopped watching and then they had to make a pivot. They have to make a decision. Do we continue putting out the TV show if nobody is watching? Or do we go ahead and make some adjustments? Or we make a pivot completely and just shut the show down? So it happens. There are a lot of podcasters who I've coached that their first show wasn't a success. I've launched a couple of podcasts that in the beginning it was just didn't work out well. And I gave myself a time frame. And after that, I made a decision to make a pivot. And it's okay. There's something about starting a new podcast that's liberating. Right? There's a lot of things that you'll learn from your first podcast that you can bring that experience and that new fresh ideas and inspiration and motivation to the second show. It could also be a pivot that you're like, okay, that was cool. I really thought I enjoyed that, but this is what I really enjoy talking about. So maybe making that pivot will kind of steer you more in the direction of a topic that you may be more passionate about. So again, don't feel like you're a failure because you had to pivot your show. It's not quitting. Quitting could be a good thing when things ain't working out well, right? We know that. You know that, right? Sometimes you have to quit things in order for you to grow. So that being said, I wanted to shoot this video to let you know that if you have thought about making a pivot, quitting your show, that it's okay. You're not a failure. A lot of podcasters do it. I've done it multiple times. And there's, again, something really inspiring and motivating and liberating when you start that second podcast. You become a whole different podcaster and you look at it through a different set of lens. And I want to be honest with you, the second or third podcast will be a lot stronger than the first. All right, so trust me on that. So hopefully this gave you some value. Please, if it did, just a little tiny bit, hit that subscribe button. Yeah, hit that subscribe button. I'm going to leave it in there. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the notification button so you can be first in line for all the latest weekly content. And leave me a comment down below. Let me know what you thought about this video. Let me know if you thought about quitting your podcast. How did it make you feel? And if you started a second podcast, let me know. I'm curious to know, what are the things that you learned from the first podcast that you brought onto the second podcast and how you made that work. So please leave me in the comment section down below. Please share this with all your friends and family on social media. And guys, listen, there's going to be a lot more content coming up here in this month of May and moving forward. And I'm really, really excited. So thanks again for tuning in. My name is Ozeal. Till next time, peace and one love.